People have always loved to travel to new places. Some go for work or to start a new life. Others travel for the thrill of adventure. To fulfill our dreams, we put our trust in the vessels that carry us across the ocean or through the sky. But when disaster strikes, our dreams of adventure come hurtling to earth. March 9th, 1931. In St. John's, Newfoundland, the harbor is a hub of activity. The Great Northern Seal Hunt is underway.
There would have been hundreds of vessels of all description crowding the harbor, and thousands of fishermen and sealers would come, descend on St. John's that beginning of spring when the sealing industry took place.
Well, of course, the sealing industry is part of our mythology, and every spring when the sealing fleet left, bells rang in the churches, horns blew in all the ships in the harbor, and everybody was down to see them off and so on.
12-year-old Edward Cronin has skipped school to be part of the excitement, but he is there to do more than see the ships off.
And one thing almost every boy in St. John's did in those days, it was a point of honor to try and stow away on a sealing ship and go to the ice.
One ship in particular is the focus of Edward's attention. It is the SS Viking, one of the oldest sealers in the Newfoundland fleet.
She had been to the ice and brought back great catches over the years. And by 1931, she was one of the desirable vessels, I would think, to have gone in.
The Viking skipper, Captain Abram Kane, Jr., comes from a seafaring family as legendary as the seal hunt itself.
Captain Abe Kane Jr. was an extraordinarily experienced sealing captain. His father was the famed highliner, Captain Abe Kane.
For Master Watch William George Johnston, the sealing season means another emotional goodbye to wife Janet and his family.
They used to call him Bill George, and we'd cry when he'd go to the ice in the spring. He didn't want to go, but he'd go.
This year, the Johnston children must also say goodbye to their older brother, Stan.
Stan was about 28. Well, he was supposed to get married before he went away, but he didn't have the money, so he said he'd go to the ice, make a bit of money, come home, and get married.
As part of the Viking crew, Stan helps load the ship's supplies, including a stock of gunpowder.
And typically, the hold of the vessel would be filled with coal and gunpowder that was used to blast vessels out of the ice when they got trapped in the ice.
On this particular day, there is an extra load of explosives. It belongs to 28-year-old American filmmaker Varrick Frissel.
Varrick Frissel was an adventurer. As a young man, he became enthralled with the idea of working in the North.
His first feature film, White Thunder, tells the dramatic story of a Newfoundland seal hunt. It needs just a few more shots to be complete, including one of an iceberg overturning.
He knew that he would potentially have to use explosives to make this happen. He arranged to have brought on board 3 extra kegs of gunpowder.
During loading, crew members notice that several tins have damaged seams, spilling gunpowder on the deck. Damaged or not, some of the containers are stored in the ship's magazine, the rest in a nearby bathroom.
Gunpowder can be ignited or initiated very easily. Putting it in the bathroom and having ready access by means of the crew with no special precautions, that's crazy.
As it steams into the North Atlantic, the Viking carries a crew of almost 150 men.
There was Varrick Frissel, Harry Sargent, who was a friend of his who was coming to help him with making the film, and his camera operator, Penrod, out of Boston.
Captain William Kennedy navigates the Viking through ice-packed waters.
Now, there was a captain of the ship who looked after everything. But the navigational captain was somebody who had expertise in going through the ice fields and And these were very, very serious decisions in those days because you got caught in pack ice, the ship could be crushed. According to my father, Will was a very good navigator.
The Viking leaves St. John's and steams northwest along the coast. It is headed for the sealing grounds near White Bay and the Horse Islands. On the way, 22-year-old telegraph operator Clayton King discovers a stowaway on board. It is 12-year-old Edward Cronin. The boy will have to stay on board until the ship returns to St. John's. But he and the crew of the Viking cannot know what is in store for them. Sunday, March 14th, 1931. It has been 5 days since the sealing ship, the SS Viking, left St. John's, Newfoundland. Despite Will Kennedy's careful navigation, by the evening of the 14th, the Viking encounters heavy ice near the mouth of White Bay.
Captain Kane had decided to bed down for the night. They would have been at this point about 12 miles off the coast of a place called the Horse Islands.
Just after 8 p.m., Captain Abe Kane stops briefly at the ship's saloon to say goodnight to filmmaker Varrick Frissel and his friends Harry Sargent and Arthur Penrod. The men are discussing a popular book about northern shipping that includes a chapter about the dangers of explosives on board. When they are joined by radio operator Clayton King and navigator Will Kennedy, the discussion turns to the Vikings' own supply, stored not far from where they are sitting.
They were all sitting around, and Frissel was trying to write a sign or make a sign that said danger, powder to put on the area where the extra gunpowder had been stored.
It is 9 p.m. Master Watch Will George Johnston, 12-year-old stowaway Edward Cronin, and veteran sealer Jerry Quinlan are returning from a prayer service held in the stern of the ship.
There had been a gigantic lurch, which occasionally would happen when a huge piece of ice would hit it.
The Viking pitches to her side, but rights herself almost immediately. Throughout the ship, crewmen start cleaning up the mess, not realizing that a terrible chain reaction has already begun.
This lurch was of such an extent that everybody was unsettled and people fell off their chairs. So you do wonder, would that have knocked some gunpowder, would have knocked a kerosene lamp?
Whatever the cause, within moments, a series of explosions rip through the SS Viking.
The crew members that were closest to the center of the vessel would have probably been killed instantly. And crew on the vessel farther away would have been thrown violently through the air, thrown into the water.
Veteran sealer Jerry Quinlan is one of those men.
I was thrown into the air on the deck. That's where he hit his head.
Below deck, stowaway Edward Cronin feels the punch of the first blast. It is nothing compared to the explosion that follows.
Some people, like my little cousin Edward, were just blown to bits.
In the ship's saloon, the explosions hurl Will Kennedy and Clayton King into the air, knocking them unconscious. Arthur Penrod is killed as he is blown towards the back of the ship. Harry Sargent is behind a post that shields him from the full impact of the blast.
When the first explosion happened, there was essentially a ball of gas that shot through from the stern of the vessel towards the front, and Sargent recounts feeling this, coming alongside of him. From all the accounts, Frissel was one of those men who were blown off the vessel with the explosion, like literally blown out on the ice. The last eyewitness account saw him struggling to get up. And then I believe there was another explosion.
20 kilometers away on the Horse Islands, residents of an isolated fishing community feel the ground shudder beneath their feet.
They heard the explosion and couldn't identify what it might have been until they saw the blaze and realized that clearly it was a vessel out there that was in trouble.
With a telegraph, their only link to the outside world, the community sends a message to St. John's. But it is Sunday night, and government offices there are closed.
The telegraph operator on the Horse Islands, Otis Bartlett, essentially stayed at his station all night to transfer messages to St. John's.
Meanwhile, the Viking is an inferno, slowly sinking into the frigid sea.
People found themselves completely disoriented, injured, wandering around in the ice pans in the middle of the night in the pitch dark in the middle of the North Atlantic, grabbing whatever they could, realizing that perhaps we can survive, but only if I can hold on to this piece of wood, or if I can manage to hold on to this lump of ice, perhaps I'll survive, while they watch their ship burning in front of them with their fellow seamen still on board.
One of the men on the ice is Captain Abram Kane, Jr.
Abe Kane's back was badly injured when he was thrown off the vessel, and had to decide, do I keep the men here and wait for rescue, or do I send them to what he knew to be nearby, which was the Horse Islands?
Captain Kane knows that the best chance for survival is to make the dangerous trek over moving ice to the Horse Islands settlement. But to do that, he needs lifeboats to carry the injured and food to keep them alive. Both are still on board the burning ship.
So I can't even imagine, how intense and absolutely devastating that could have been. As many men got off as possible, and then he actually had to send them back, even though there was continuous explosions on the vessel. He had to send some men back. And this is where Captain William Johnson actually came to the forefront, because he knew right away that we have to go back and get supplies, or we're really going to be in trouble.
Other volunteers lower the lifeboats over the ship's side. Those on the ice help the disabled into the boats. One of the injured is veteran sealer Jerry Quinlan.
He had a cut right across his head there, probably 5 inches across his head.
Will George Johnston is one of the last men to leave the burning ship, but there is at least one man still alive on board, 22-year-old radio operator Clayton King.
And he woke up essentially engulfed in flames. His entire body was in flames. Both of his legs were under a giant wooden timber.
Clayton is able to beat out the flames, and despite 2 broken legs, summons the strength to drag himself to the side of the ship and throw himself over.
Harry Sargent, Frissel's friend, and the navigator, Captain William Kennedy, found King and helped him.
Together, Sargent and Kennedy pull King from the flaming wreck. On the opposite side of the ship, the other survivors prepare themselves for the trek to the Horse Island settlement. At 2 a.m., they watch the SS Viking disappear into the black water.
It sank essentially overnight. The captain ordered the men to start walking, those who could. You understand they're in a moving ice field at this time. There's some ice, but there's lots of open water, and it's pitch black, and they're walking towards an unknown island, hoping they'll get there.
Monday morning, March 15th, 1931. In the port of St. John's, a telegraph arrives from an isolated fishing community on the Horse Islands, off the northern coast of Newfoundland.
To Minister Marine and Fisheries, early this morning the burning wreckage of a steamer was sighted about 8 miles from here. Also saw men traveling on ice towards island. Signed, Otis Bartlett, Operator, Horse Islands.
The government immediately orders several ships to head to the disaster scene. For the surviving crew of the SS Viking, it is a slow and painful journey. Those who fall through the ice into the bitterly cold water are hauled out by their companions and forced to carry on.
After having that gigantic explosion and your vessel blowing apart beneath your feet, and then surviving, and then having to make that journey over ice and the ice fields, over broken ice pans, hauling dory loads of your injured crewmen is extraordinary.
With head injuries and a broken leg, sealer Jerry Quinlan is one of the injured being pulled in a lifeboat. When the damaged boat can go no further, he must find another way.
He realized that he had to do something. Something had to be done, or he wasn't going to live. That's when he got out of the door and started to walk. He used the door. Oar was in the door, and used it up under his arm as a crutch.
8 kilometers from Horse Islands, one group is forced to stop. The ice has damaged the lifeboat carrying 3 injured crew and cannot be moved any further. Master Watch Will George Johnston volunteers to stay with the men until rescuers come back for them.
And he took his clothes off and shared with 2 more men. He had his oilskins on. He said to us, that's all he had on. He wasn't expecting he was going to live. He had no drink, no water, no nothing.
16 hours after leaving the disaster site, the first group of survivors reaches the Horse Island settlement.
The people really rallied together. The women took them in, took care of them with their very limited supplies that they would have.
By the time Horse Island residents find veteran sealer Jerry Quinlan, his strength is all but gone.
They knew he was one of the Viking crew, but they didn't know who he was. And when they got him into the Horse Island, he didn't know who he was. I guess they had no medication, so they just cleaned his wounds and bandaged it up. They treated him like a mother and father. He owed his life to them people.
Not all of the Viking crew members are accounted for. Navigator William Kennedy, wireless operator Clayton King, and American Harry Sargent are among the missing.
What had happened with Clayton King and Harry Sargent and Captain William Kennedy were that they were on a pan of ice, and they essentially started to drift away from land, away from the Horse Islands, away from any hope of rescue on this pan of ice that was disintegrating beneath them.
Both Kennedy and Sargent ignore their own injuries to tend to Clayton King. Several times they think they see steamers on the horizon, but they turn out to be nothing but clouds. Very soon, they will be swallowed by the frigid sea. On Tuesday morning, March 16th, government offices in St. John's receive another telegraph from the Horse Islands.
50 or more men landed, others making slow progress towards land. Men report 20 or more dead.
We heard about the explosion, yes. What it spoke about the men was safe, but it never said anything about my father and his dad. So, well, they said they must have been gone. Oh, it was devastating.
28-year-old Stan Johnston, however, is alive. He reaches the Horse Island settlement safely, unaware that his father has stayed behind with one of the damaged dories. 118 men eventually straggle into the Horse Island settlement, overwhelming the meager resources of the isolated community. But help is on the way. Captained by Abram Kane's brother, Jacob, the SS Sagona has medical supplies and a team of doctors and nurses on board. By late Tuesday afternoon, the SS Sagona is steaming northward. One of the lookouts sights something in the distance, a dark object that looks like a patch of seals. As the Sagona moves closer, the lookout realizes that what he sees are not seals, but 3 men on an ice pan, now less than 2 meters across. The piece of ice has drifted 35 kilometers from the disaster site, and it is pure luck that the men are found at all. Wednesday morning, March 17, 1931, after 45 hours on the open ice, Master Watch Will George Johnston awakens to the sight of something on the horizon. It is another sealer, the SS Beatuk, and it is headed toward them. Johnston and his shipmates are safe at last. March 24th, 1931. The SS Sagona enters St. John's Harbor. It carries the most severely injured of the Viking crew, including Captain Abram Kane, navigator Will Kennedy, wireless operator Clayton King, and American Harry Sargent.
It was not met like a traditional arrival of sealers, would have been met with a great hoopla and happiness and celebration, and they had had news that many men had been lost. So the crowd that met the vessel as it came into port was a sad group of people.
Of the injured, Harry Sargent is the only one who walks ashore on his own, where he is greeted by family and friends. For Captain Will Kennedy's family, however, there will be no joyful reunion.
I said to Father, what happened to Captain Will? And he said, oh, my son, he said, he died coming through the Narrows. That's the entrance to St. John's Harbor.
Of the more than 140 men aboard the Viking, 27 are dead, including 12-year-old stowaway Edward Cronin.
If he'd gone to school that day, it would have been a different story.
Of those in the ship's saloon at the time of the explosion, only Harry Sargent and Clayton King survive. King loses both legs to amputation. Will George Johnston receives a medal for saving his injured shipmates in the damaged dory. Sealer Jerry Quinlan survives his injuries, but the ordeal has a lasting impact.
Well, I can't say it made an old man out of him, but he found the effects of it all his years.
A government inquiry finds strong evidence that faulty packaging and storage of the ship's gunpowder is at the heart of the disaster. It fails to pinpoint what exactly set off the explosives, but recommends measures to prevent the leakage of gunpowder in the future.
Some changes because of the disaster that happened were that they decided that gunpowder, before it could be loaded on board, had to be stored differently, perhaps in waterproof wooden kegs.
In the fall of 1931, Varrick Frissel's film is re-edited using previously shot footage and released under a different title.
And it had been called White Thunder, and they changed the name very quickly to the Viking, cashing on the international notoriety from the tragedy.
For a short time after the disaster, Frissel's family holds out hope that he is still alive.
Frissel's father at the time hired an experienced Arctic explorer and pilot, Bern Balchin, who flew an amphibian plane to the area to do an aerial search of the region. They didn't find anyone who had survived.
For the descendants of the people who died in the Viking tragedy, the impact of the disaster has not yet faded.
This is our history, this is our tradition. All of our families have been affected by this. And it's not the only tragedy that my family's been affected by, but when you live near the sea and you're involved in the sea, this becomes your story.